Well, welcome to another episode of Theology, where I've got my cup of tea and my big copy of the Confession. And sorry for the bit of the hiatus we took there. We have moved to Gloucester, and we had a big time of getting our internet set up. But praise God, our internet is now working, and that means more theology. And in honor of that, the first episode of Theology in our new house, I'm actually having some biscuit brew by Yorkshire Tea. Normally, I don't like flavored teas and flavored coffees, but I just really like this black tea that does taste as if there are biscuits in it or cookies for the Americans that might be watching. So, with that, a big thanks to David for taking us to the beginning of section 1 of chapter 5 of Providence, reminding us that God is directing all things, and that is actually good, that his hands are controlling and directing all things because he is wise, he is powerful, he is merciful, and he is loving. So we should be thankful for those truths. And so that brings us to, we're going to cover section 2 and section 3 as it really explains to us how God is directing all these things. So section 2. Although in relation to the foreknowledge and decree of God, the first cause, all things come to pass immutably and infallibly, yet by the same providence he orders them to fall out according to the nature of second causes, either necessarily, freely, or contingently. Section 3. God in his ordinary providence makes use of means, yet is free to work without, above, and against them at his pleasure. So the first section told us that God is directing all things, and these two sections then tell us, in a sense, sort of how those things are happening. So section 2 speaks of the way in which God is the first cause, so he causes things to happen, and they are immutable, they're unchangeable, and they're infallible, they're perfect. But the confession here states in the second part, the thing that we know, we see the secondary causes. We see our actions, that they have consequences, that they accomplish things, and that God, again, works through those secondary causes here. And it gives us a list of 3 different types of secondary causes: necessarily, freely, or contingently. Necessarily here, they cite it's simply that the Lord has set up, for instance, the sun and the moon and the stars to give light, and so they necessarily happen. Freely is just the choices that we make. They give the example of a man who has committed manslaughter and he needs to flee to one of these cities of refuge. And so he's free to get to the city as quickly as he can. And then finally, contingently is those instances here. They cite the example of one of the prophets in 1 Kings where he tells of King Ahab that he will die in battle, and that will prove that the prophet's words are true. And so here it's contingent. It will happen because the words of the prophet here, Micaiah, is true. And then section 3 simply tells us that though God ordinarily uses these means to accomplish his will, the secondary causes, he can work without, above, and against them at his pleasure. So for instance, normally axe heads, because they're made of metal, sink, but in the case of Elijah, God lifts the axe head and makes it float on the water. Normally, women at an old age do not give birth, such as Sarah, but God works in order to have her be able to give birth to Isaac. And so God is free to work against, without, or above them as he pleases. And again, the confession in all these instances wants to preserve God's sovereignty and God's ability to do all that he sets out to do because of who he is. And so we see that in these 2 sections here, that God works out all things, again, for his glory because of his goodness and love. And so all things are in his control. And so that takes us through sections 2 and 3. And I'm going to enjoy my biscuit brew. Let me know if anyone's had this, or as is usual with the comments, let me know who is deeply offended by my use of flavored tea here. But thanks, it's really good to be back. And yeah, hope you enjoy. Yep, it tastes like there's biscuits in here. Maybe I should have one.